Hello, beautifuls. You are listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas, and I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Vanessa Scotto. On the show, we're talking about being on the embodied spiritual path and what that means. What is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything, all the beauty and crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life? We're attempting to sort that out for ourselves here on the show. In today's episode, we are talking about the identity crisis that can arise as you heal and transform. Whether we're talking about gaining more psychological health or the big ol' wake-up call of the spiritual path, either way, you're eventually going to shed some part or many parts that used to feel like you, both to yourself and also to those around you. And then, what happens next? Vanessa and I are talking about navigating the identity crises that are a natural part of any healing journey. If you're enjoying the show, we would be thrilled if you could leave a review for us on iTunes or Stitcher or our Facebook page, which is Bliss and Grit. You can also head over to the website, blissandgrit.com, and subscribe if you want to hear updates as different goodies crop up for the community. One last note before we head into the conversation. Those of you who listen already know this, but those of you who don't, we curse like sailors sometimes. So if there are kids around or if you're at work, you might want to wear headphones. We have a teensy bit of digital interference in the beginning of this chat, but then it does clear up, so hang with us. It's not maddening to listen to all the way through. Okay, here we go.
Heyo, Vanessa here.
Hello, Vanessa. Oh, this is Brooke. Hi.
Hi. I was like thinking I set it up where we announce ourselves.
I know, our voices are identified.
That was really weird.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Brooke. This is kind of your fault because you gave me the giggles right before we jumped on the call. So let's see where this goes. So here's what's been happening lately. If you've all been listening in somewhat of an order to some of the past episodes, you may already be familiar with the beginnings of this story, but I should say it because people do just bounce around at their pleasure. So let's see, what year is this? 2017? So are we in 2017?
Yeah, right. This is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Yes, it's 2017, not 2017, but the divine dementia, as Jeannie Zandy calls it.
So
okay.
In 2016, I got quite sick. I'd been sick actually for a while, but I got really sick at the end of 2016. So I left my home in Miami. I moved to Austin because I was dealing with an environmental illness. And I've noticed that sickness has a few aspects to it. And the one that I wanted to talk about today is the identity crisis that arises. So, bear with me as I sort of piece this together. But here's something that happened once I got sick. I couldn't exercise really anymore. I couldn't be fun party girl. Like, now, don't get me wrong. I probably haven't been at big parties. I don't know. I was 37, 38 or something. I'm 43 now, but I always thought I was like fun, I identified as like a foodie, and I'd go out to eat and I'd like cook and I'd drink and, mix cocktails, like very identified as like a glutton and gourmand, right? And also identified as the person who, I'm not saying I'm a spectacularly good friend, but certainly if you needed me, I'm going to try to show up. I would definitely show up for my clients. I am a spectacularly good coach like that, like whatever they need. So there's all of these aspects of myself, quote unquote, that I'm accustomed to. And we could just use the word, I'm identified with. And getting sick is sort of like pulled the rug out from under me, where all of a sudden, I'm not the party girl. My diet's drastically being managed by this very specific protocol. So I'm not the foodie. I'm not the gourmand. I can't do all of these wonderful things. I'm tired and I really have to do a lot of restorative care. So I'm not the I can drop everything and do anything for anyone and hold it down in emergency. Some days, frankly, thank God, better and better. But there are some days where like, I'm not fun. I'm not sexy. Like all the tricks that one has up their sleeves to get relationship, to like keep my husband wanting me and keep my marriage safe and make my friends value me and like show it for my clients and like feel good about me. All of those tricks I'm using are being pulled out from under me. And I think it's fair to say it's a bit of an identity crisis. And there's a lot that obviously we will say about that since we're doing the whole episode. But I guess, Brooke, what I was first thinking is that this happens throughout our lives, right? These moments of shifting identities as we change. And whether you're all just looking at psychological healing, or if you're on that spectrum of looking for real truth and spiritual evolution, like Brooke and I are always talking about, wherever you are, we'll notice that there's these moments where something changes and we're no longer the person we thought of ourselves as. And then we have to like deal with that. Like, what does that mean for our relationships? What does that mean inside of our own minds when we don't recognize ourselves? And so go. Identity crisis and go.
And start. Yes, that. Yeah, as you know, I'm up against a lot of that too in a variety of categories. And it is something that I think is it doesn't get talked about that much. It's a very natural part of healing because what we're doing is noticing and shedding our conditioning, whether you put that in a psychological or a spiritual context or both. And so when that stuff sheds, there are going to be certain identities, behaviors, people, things that just don't fit anymore. And that happens on a really broad continuum. Like let's say psychological healing from victim martyr identity, which is really common. And then everyone in your environment would expect you to keep reaching for that role, but you just can't reach for it anymore. Well, that's like health, right? Psychological health. But you're going to have a bit of an identity crisis and everyone around you is going to be expecting you to play a certain role. So it's like, what's going on? Or it can be these kind of larger movements as well of where it maybe isn't so clear cut, like psychological healing, like better and better used to always identify as victim martyr. Don't do that anymore. That's like a clear, like better. Sometimes there are these things that come along from like the great I am in the sky. I don't really think of a great I am in the sky, by the way, but whatever the hell you want to, that's my way of saying whatever the hell you want to describe it as, where you just get like under its thumb and it's not up to you, like an illness, like you're talking about. It comes along and it's just like, no matter how much you might squirm, that's what's going to happen. And so I think on that whole content, which of course then the same thing, like the people around you are like expecting you to fit a certain role or a certain way of being. One of the things that's coming up for me lately, one of the many, and you can actually hear it in the way I'm talking, and it's frustrating for me because it's like I can't talk fast anymore. Like I'm not one of those fake spiritual slow talkers where I'm like imitating Reggie Ray all day long. But I'm not, my brain isn't fast and I'm not clever in the way that I used to be, because that used to be a part of my identity, like smart, fast thinking, quick talking, good with words, and brainy, right? Like I would love to read. Recently, my bedside table for years, it was just literally, quite literally 20 books stacked up next to my bed, and I'm reading all of them simultaneously. And suddenly I have no interest in books. None. I can't care. I can't pick up a book. Nothing can hold my attention that's like brainy. I live in the New Haven area, so a lot of my clients and friends are academics. They're affiliated with Yale University, and I go hang out with them and I'm just like the quiet one, whereas I used to be the one that was like in with the witty intellectual banter. And it's a liberated body. Like one of the reasons why that podcast is ending is because I just can't I can't force myself to formulate intellectual questions and ask intellectuals the questions. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like there's nothing wrong with that. It's just for whatever reason that is a complete mystery to me, that part of my identity is just falling away. And I don't want to come off as to say like the people who are very close to me, my dear friends who've known me forever, sort of the weird spiritual person or the faking it slow talker. It's almost, it's irritating. It's like, I want to be the quick person. I want to be able to get the words out fast. I want them to be clever and interesting. And it's like my mouth and my brain just don't work if I'm not, it's like I'm getting closer and closer to the bone where it's like, no just truth. And I'm like, okay, truth most of the time, but I also want to be cute and funny and like hang out with my friends and have witty banter about whatever world events. And it's like there's something that's not letting me. And it is like a kind of frustration, obviously, but also a grief and a mystery. So it's like, what is this? It's like the being taken apart, Actually, same interview that I talked about in the last one. So again, I will put it in the show notes, but Jeannie Zandy on Buddha at the Gas Pump. And she was talking about how there's this moment that's a complete mystery that most people don't notice until the weird things are happening. But before the weird things are happening like this, where I can't care about reading, right? And it used to be nectar for me. Before that happens, it's almost like there's some divine mechanic that sneaks in and like steals your carburetor in the night. And then you're like, why won't this thing run the way it used to run? And I heard that and I was like, oh my God, so relieving to hear that I'm not alone in this. And so these things show up in a myriad of ways, like things that used to be interesting or easy for you are no longer. Illnesses show up. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a mouthful.
I
I'm
know.
sorry, honey. It's so much. It's really so much. I get it. I really get it. And I think like on this more spiritual level, because if I could put any words to, sort of what you're describing, and words would be sort of silly, but we're going to do it because we're doing a podcast and there's words. But if I could put any words, it's like what you're describing, Brooke, I think is the natural identity crisis that arises when you're on a spiritual path. It's like meant to happen, right? It's this natural process. And I relate to it because for all of you, little secret, last week I was sobbing hysterically to Brooke about my identity crisis, about how I'm not fun and I'm not this and I'm not a mother and like I can't hang my hat on being a wife. That doesn't feel like a good identity. And like I'm not fun and I'm not a foodie and like I don't know.
What were you saying? I feel like I'm going to turn into some dowdy Mrs. Doubtfire where people just come to with their problems and that's all I'm good for. Oh, right, thanks, Mrs. Doubtfire, for talking about my problems. Now I'm going to go out and party while you go to bed.
Right. It's like the only thing I can hang my hat on is like I'm a good listener, So.
Yeah, right.
So it's like I don't know what to do and how it feels to me. Like I've described to you, Brooke, as like spinning around in circles and like I have this hot cup of tea and I want to put it down on something, but I can't find anything to put it down on. It's the only thing I can describe because I think there's a sensation of spinning as my ego is like looking for this identity to grasp onto because that's how it feels comfy. And it's a little unnerving anytime we go through change, right? Because as we go through change, it's like what you're describing, like, will my relationships hold up? Will I still be valuable in my community? Will I still be loved? Will my career still be a success? Will I still provide for myself? Every time we go through change. So right now, I think you and I are going through this restructuring. I mean, it's kind of like a giant change, for lack of a better way of saying it. And of course, my fears are like, will Mario be able to stay with me? Will I become too, I don't know, abstract for him? And some of them are not really so well thought out. You know, a lot of people say, well, I never really thought about it like that. And it's like, well, neither do I until I'm reflecting on it.
Mm-hmm.
But the underlying energy is like, well, we come with our ego identities because we think that will make us happy and safe, which
but there's
means
some
love.
perks to it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a strategy. John Wellwood used to call it like the identity project.
Yeah.
Right? We come up with these identities. So for me, let's say with men, I could be very charismatic, I could be very sexy, I could be very fun. I was a fun party girl, but I was also super cool. And, you know, like all of these different ways that we are going to control our environment,
Mm-hmm.
or at least think that we're controlling our environment, right? I learned through my divorce the very hard way that there's no such thing, because I was using all those tricks, quote unquote, not intentionally. You all get that. Just my ego was doing what it does.
Yeah. It was running
good.
its program that it had
Yeah.
written, you know? Yeah.
Identity project in full swing. And then it didn't work, which I was super shocked about. Like, but I did all the things, right? Ego project was in full swing and this should have worked. And so I had that revelation, but even now there's these like wispy fears of like, well, if I was to let go and not hold on to this identity project, might everything fall apart?
Yeah.
Might I lose everything, you know, everything that you have come to value? And I think that right now, of course, as I said, we're talking about these big cataclysmic changes, but this happens all the time. Like, smallest example, going on retreat. So scary,
Mm-hmm.
weirdly scary. Like you show up to go on a meditation retreat and you're scared shit that like your identity is going to get messed with, and you don't know who you're going to be when you come back, and you don't know if people are going to relate to you.
And then when you do come back, like maybe there's, you know, more bickering with your partner, and that just kind of feeds the flames of like, yeah, I'm different, and they, friends, family, coworkers, whatever, they don't like it, you know, so that can get, for sure.
Yeah, well, I was thinking when you were using that example before of the victim martyr identity, which the funniest thing is, by the way, no one knows they're a victim martyr.
No, and I think
until they're healing
98% of us are. I
we
am.
should just-
You know, that's
Me
one of
too.
my clothing. That's one of my outfits that I've worn. Jesus.
It was a
lot.
terrible feeling when I first recognized that I was running some martyring programming. I'm like, what, me? But there it was. And when people are running it around us, dear people, they often don't know it because it's especially us self-reliant types.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, I would never. Anyway, but let's just say you were. And then some of the things that would make you do is like take responsibility for how other people feel, load everything on your own back, you know, take on obligations, take on pain and suffering, do everything for everyone, never ask for anything. Like, these are some of the behaviors that might come along with this particular program. Well, of course, if you start to go to a therapist or, you know, on a meditation retreat, or you do something and you start to shift, and that constriction in your identity starts to heal, so you stop showing up that way. Well, there are definitely guaranteed people in your life who will not like that.
Yeah.
Because every victim martyr attracts a narcissist.
Except for me.
Yeah.
Let me show you my list of narcissists.
Like you can't help. Every victim martyr attracts people who love that they didn't have to give anything, right?
Right. And that someone just like makes it all happen and still feels like the bad person, right? Like it's just a win-win for
it's a win-win
a narcissist
for certain people, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think about it like our identity project. This is how I always see it. Did I ever say this to you before? I think about it like we have a neon sign over our head, right? And this particular neon sign, if we're going to continue this example, is like, hey, I'm going to do everything, okay? And I'm definitely not going to ask for anything back. And I'm super cool with this arrangement because like I like to be like a camel, just load it on me.
Right.
And that's kind of blinking over your head. So the people who are like, oh my God, that sounds like this sweet deal. I'm so into you doing that. They're going to find you. So at these moments of growth that we can encounter as we're on our own healing journeys, this very real sensation arises like, shit's going to change. And we have to deal with both kind of what you were describing earlier, Brooke, as like, I was thinking we have like both the inside level, like what does it mean for us when we don't feel like we fit into our world in exactly that same way as prior? And then the external level, like how do we confront changes in our relationship, in our career? Like all of a sudden you don't want to do that podcast anymore. And like, how do we navigate?
Right. And it's like successful. And I love the people who listen to it. And I love the people who I interview. And it's like, I just can't bring myself to do it. And so it's like, I'm disappointing people. You know, like we have all these thoughts, which isn't true. Like, you know, it's this great project that happened. But one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking, two things that I think are quite common to people that are, you know, can happen outside the spiritual realm, so that it doesn't have to be this whole like, you know, not everyone's on the unravel it all the way to know me. People getting sober. And people who maybe had in either direction food issues, whether they were undereating and starving themselves and they formed a healthy relationship with food and then became a normal weight, or people who were overeating and emotionally eating and they healed a bunch of wounding and didn't need to do that anymore. And so they lost weight. And what happens with these groups is you find, you know, like everyone who got sober ever lost a bunch of friends afterwards because they discovered that most of their friends were a bunch of drunk assholes because you were a drunk asshole. Until you got sober. And so, yes, it's a big, in that example, it's a big change. Like most, or I've talked to plenty of people for whom all of their friends disappeared. That's a big change. It's quite disruptive. You really feel like the rug's been pulled out from under you. But the good news is you're not surrounded by drunk assholes anymore because you're not one either. And so then you know, in the space that's been created, fresh stuff comes in. And the fresh stuff that comes in are people who are on the same level of health as you. And so you have, over time, as you heal, you know, new friends who resonate at that level. Or if you've, I think it's quite common, someone, say, loses a bunch of weight not because of forcing themselves into the, I need to be small because my culture likes small people box, but because, let's say they had a very unhealthy, addictive behavior to food that was filling a hole, and they have attended to the hole, you know, healed their trauma, and they don't need to do that anymore. And so they become a healthy weight. It's really not uncommon that a partner in particular would feel very threatened by that because, you know, suddenly you're not, you know, you might get more attention, or maybe you feel like maybe you're going to leave me because you feel like you deserve an upgrade, or, you know, whatever the pain bodies are that are running for the other people out there, the actions look like little sabotagey behaviors or comments. So things like, you've worked a long day. I just baked you 4 dozen cookies. Sweetie pie, I love you so much. These are your favorite cannolis, you know, like, why are you doing this? I don't want cannolis, you know. This is a very common thing that we see. So even just on the level of regular old life, healing things, deepening into ourselves and growing, we're going to have to come to terms with the fact that things do fall away when they don't match us anymore.
I know. I think that's the hard part. It's like, I remember when I went to school for Chinese medicine. So I was young. I was like 24. I didn't have a lot that I was losing or releasing at that time. You know, I was still forming my identity. So I was one of those people going into acupuncture school and forming my identity around it. But I had some classmates who were more mature and married and kids and all sorts of different positions, just older than me, more rich in life. And a lot of people end up getting divorced.
Yeah.
Or having bumps in their marriages or these different kinds of things arising. I mean, they certainly found all of a sudden like the career they were working for 20 years felt like it became like a straitjacket, like something they had tolerated all of a sudden became intolerable. And it's a lot like that, right? Like, I mean, it could be as simple as how many people have gone to like therapy and you start to kind of look at some stuff that's up for you. Or you go to a spiritual community and you get like into a sangha, whatever it is. And then all of a sudden your friends don't fit. And you realize, holy shit, that person triggers my pain body so intensely. Our friendship was completely based on codependence. And then you have to figure out what to do about it. Now, I think what's hard about that. So at first, some of it's just, I don't know, for lack of a better way of saying it, like logistically hard. Like, we don't want to hurt people's feelings. We get to these crossroads. Like, do I talk about this with someone? Like, do I tell them I outgrew them? Do I tell them they're triggering my pain bodies, or I don't want to talk about politics all the time. Like, do I tell them or don't I? Do I write it down? Do I speak to them? So some of it in the beginning is, just logistically hard. But then we also have these other layers, like, loss is hard for us as humans, generally speaking. And we're bumping up against this big layer that you and I are describing, which is what will be required of me? Like, if I let go of this identity project and I start to go towards what's true. I mean, we've seen what's happened culturally. What's true is not always valued. So if I let go of this identity project and I start to go towards what's true, what is going to happen to me? Right? Like, the identity project would have you think you're going to be up Schitt's Creek.
Right. You'll be alone. People will think you're insane. Nobody will love you. Those are all the things it tells you.
That same Jeannie Zandy interview on Back App, I think it was this one. Do you remember when she was saying that, like, the last gasp of her ego was like, you're going to die alone.
Yeah, people will think you're insane.
and that's the programming, right? Like, that's what our mind would have us believe. So whenever there's change and we feel like the tide shifting underneath us and we find ourselves a little bit unrecognizable, or we find that the clothes we're in, quote unquote, like metaphorically, are ill-fitting, there's this like internal vibration of fear that starts to rise that goes, holy shit, everything's going to fall apart. You're going to lose everything. No one's going to love you. You're going to be insane, and you're probably going to be poor.
Right. You'll be one of those crazy people, sort of crazy spiritual person homeless, begging for pennies and living in the proverbial cave. Yes. Yes. Carrying your rice sack from village to village. Yeah, it's fascinating. And yet, I think what we see from people, whether it's the big picture spiritual transformation to healing patterns of victim martyr, overeating, addiction, whatever it is, life always gets way better on the other side. It's not that there aren't uncomfortable truths and transitions that you have to navigate about the things that don't fit anymore and that fall away, but life gets quite a lot better on the other side. What does Kieran say? Truth is always good news. I was like, yeah, actually it is. It's just that our ego is convinced that that's not the case and it's protecting us. And so, like, I remember listening to Kristen Kirk be interviewed too, probably also on Back App, although maybe not. And she was talking about this process of surrender that she went through, where she spent years taking like 4 or 5 hours every day to just kind of lay in bed and let herself surrender into the silence. You know, this is not something that our society gives a big thumbs up to. And she said, I was really afraid to do it. I was really afraid to let go because my fear was that on the other side, I would lose everything, that I wouldn't be doing the same work, and I wouldn't have the same friends, and I wouldn't live in the same town and everything would change. And she said, you know what? I was right. And it's way better now. I'm really glad that I let that all happen.
Right.
It's just the same as somebody who's like, it's very hard to be in early sobriety and let go of all these shitty people who I used to call friends. But the good news is you're not surrounded by shitty people anymore.
Right. Or really dysfunctional people. I just keep thinking whenever you say that of that Friends episode with Fun Bobby. Did you ever see that character, Fun Bobby?
I do
and
remember
Fun Bobby was like
Fun
this
Bobby.
total drunk. Apparently they didn't know that was why he was so fun. And they like really help him get sober, and he gets sober and he's like super boring and glum.
Yes. Right. We're all afraid we're going to be the Fun Bobby story.
Afraid.
Yes.
And in the beginning, in a way, I have spoken to people who've gotten sober, and the identity crisis was very real because perhaps they were drinking to get past some social anxiety.
Sure.
So that once that got taken away, where they might have identified as this fun, outgoing person, now their awareness is developing like, oh, but underneath there was this thing, you know,
and now I have to
piece of me.
Greet this thing.
Yeah. I mean, I guess as we're saying it, that's kind of the whole thing with awareness, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like that story I've told where when I was at grad school at CIIS, and I'm in a class for something called Hakomi therapy, which is beautiful somatic therapy. And we're doing these like experiential exercises, and I'm sitting across from a friend who I love dearly. She's such a good friend of mine, and she touches me all the time. She was super touchy. And I'm sitting across from her, and they have my friend, this woman, reach towards me, and she's going to touch me. You know, she's reaching towards me with intent to touch me, but doing it so slow, micro slow. And my job was to stay in my body and breathe and just feel what happens as I observe someone moving towards touching me. I had a panic attack and had to leave the class. Strangest thing. Like the facilitator had to come out and be with me. Now, I had no idea how complex touch was for me. And if you think I wanted that to be part of my identity, right, you would be sorely mistaken. Of course not. You know, in fact, like, I think I would have identified other than that. I mean, I was touching people for a living. I was doing Chinese medicine and massage, and I get tons of body work and energy work. And I would have identified as someone who was very comfortable with touch. But as soon as my awareness increased and it got very subtle, I saw, oh, that's not true at all. In direct reality. In direct reality, I had a lot of wounding around touch. And in fact, someone moving towards touching me was more intimate than I knew how to tolerate or feel safe with. And so there's this, like, I guess as our awareness increases, which can happen from so many ways, you know, people do a yoga teacher training, like, you know, you can read a book. Yeah. I mean, frankly, you can listen to this podcast. You can go to therapy. Like we said, you can have a spiritual teacher. You can meditate, whatever gateway in. And as your awareness increases, you all of a sudden see what's really up. And that is a minor identity crisis. Yeah. Because it's not conceptual anymore. It's direct experience.
Yeah. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Well, there's that for sure. And I don't think we realize the gap between our conceptual reality and reality. Like,
no, we don't.
We don't get it.
No, we don't, like, until we get
talk about it.
And then it's like, oh, you know, living it is a different ride.
Direct experience is so different than our concepts. Like, even just how long, like, I this is so silly, but so I used to be so bitchy. I mean, I think I was always a pretty nice human being at heart, but like, I could be so bitchy. Like, I was this badass, and like, I had a bad temper when I did. And so I remember being in school for acupuncture, and like I said, I was 24, maybe I was 25 at the time. And I don't know, something came up. I got mad at someone. And I think I said, like, you know, I'm such a bitch. And people are like, no, you're not.
Hmm.
And I'm like, what do you mean? And like, they weren't buying my identity.
Yeah.
And it was very startling. And this happens a lot with people. They see themselves as the bad one or the partier or the like, I don't know, introvert or the shy one, like whatever you're still believing about yourself. I always feel like we have a delay. Like we have a very long lag before our conceptual reality like catches up to direct experience. And I remembered feeling like shocked.
Yeah.
Like, oh, but like, what are you guys missing? Because clearly I'm pretty right about this.
Yeah. I go through that recently more and more with the nice one. It's been a while since I really fully wore that suit, but it keeps being, expected. Oh, you're the nice one. And I'm just like, I'm not that nice. Like, I'm really honest. I think in my best moments, I would say I'm very loving. And I like that I have work where I get to love people for a living. That sounded wrong. You know what I mean? Not in the oldest profession
Nothing
way.
Creepy.
Nothing creepy. Heart loving. But it's this funny thing because like that's valued. Of course that's valued. And I work in a field, in holistic healthcare where it's in particular valued. But I was talking with a friend today who's a social worker, and she was talking about how fed up she is with the number of exceptions she's made for clients. She works with clients who are quite mentally ill. And she's like, their lives are constant chaos. So I'm constantly making exceptions for them. And then I'm constantly getting screwed and I'm done. And I said, yeah, I'm a really big fan of zero exceptions 100% of the time. And she just kind of looked shocked, right? Like there's just this moment. And I was like, no, really? Like I've just never had an experience where I make an exception. Oh, I know you don't see people on Saturdays, but could you just see me on Saturdays? I know you don't have any 7 p.m. slots, but could you just see me at 7 p.m.? I know you don't do 2 back-to-back sessions, but could you just see me too? The answer is always no. And like, it's funny because the people who are maybe still wearing the identity of I need to contort myself in order to help other people and I'm the helper, it has this moment. And like, we talked about it for a while and she was like, yeah, that's so relieving. I can't think of a time where it worked out. I was like, yeah, it might. I mean, her job is to work with people whose lives are chaos. But who knows what happens when it's just like that's suddenly not, the constant exceptions are not an option. Who knows? Like people might get well more quickly. Or she might decide actually this job doesn't fit anymore. Like what the outer actions look like, who knows? But, if you just keep going for truth, truth's going to keep revealing something new.
It is hard though, like I feel like anytime I've been up against one of these moments where it feels like your clothes don't fit anymore, it's just really scary and unsettling because I think we said this in our last week's episode, it's your ego's job is to make everything into a problem. It kind of just,
that's its job, guys. In case you didn't know,
problem.
Watch it. Watch it in action.
And it's like hard as shit. Sometimes like I've had this moment and I have clients who say it like they're almost praying for a dark night of the soul because you want something. I know you want something so bad, like that on your knees moment that's finally going to shake you out of whatever constriction you're stuck in or whatever contortion. Cause you're like, it's not working. This isn't moving. But like the reality of the experiences are so intense. Like the reality of waking up and realizing that my ex-husband and I couldn't move forward together. It was devastating.
Mm-hmm.
It was devastating. And then there's like these, cheery words like, no, but it's good. It's truth, right? And it'll like be okay. And they're super hard to cling on to until you've been through it a few times. Until you kind of been through the washing machine. And so it's like, I feel, let's say right now, with what's happening with my current identity crisis, I was just telling you before, Brooke, but for all of you listening, I'm just finished reading Adyashanti's book. It's called The End of the World.
The End of Your World. Yeah.
The End of Your World.
Such a good book, or listen. The audio is really good.
And, is it him reading it?
Yeah.
Oh, that must be very pleasant.
It's good.
That sounds nice. maybe I'll do it that way. Anyway, so I'm reading it, and there's a chapter that he's describing in his own process as he was like coming to truth for himself about his identity crisis. And he was just describing how he had always identified as an athlete, and then he got really sick and he couldn't be that anymore. And this like fucked up place he was in because of it. And then he'd go out and he'd try to train again once he got better, and like life would come along and like get him really sick. And, you know, and this kept going until finally, I mean, a few times, till finally he just released that identity. And then he just moved his body for the pleasure of it, but not to identify as an athlete. And he really was talking about it like, you know, like trust life, right? Like just like what we're saying, like life is doing this because he was ripe to have that identity stripped.
Yeah.
Just the same way as like none of you are in therapy by coincidence or at a Rolfers studio or with an energy worker or meditating. Like none of this is coincidence.
Or listening to this right now.
Yeah.
And it's holding your attention. No, really.
Yeah.
It clearly, means something for you if you're listening to it.
It means something for you. You're ripe for whatever that is. As challenging as it may be for you, you're ripe to shift something or shed something. And so what I was appreciating for myself, just reading his words, this is why I think our Sangha episode is so useful. Like I needed to hear that because the way that my ego mind, my identity project had sort of twisted it was like, you don't have an identity anymore. And this is a really big problem. And like your sickness kind of took it away from you, as opposed to life granted me a sickness. So I can let go of this because I wasn't able to prior.
Yeah.
I mean, if I think about being ill, besides everything I described, it's like it made me push up against the hard edges with my family and leaving Florida and all these places. I was super bound around codependency. In all those ways, it was such a gift. But in the middle of it, like when I was calling you crying last week, like that was not feeling like a gift.
Right.
In that moment. So if you're in the middle of it, you may not even know it till you're through it sometimes, what this was for you. But maybe just hearing us can be a helpful way to remember, like, this is a normal process, right? Like a snake sheds skin.
It's a healing process. This is a positive process. Yeah.
Yeah. And it may be uncomfortable, but it is okay. And everything will be okay. And in fact, you will be more yourself. It's more like coming home to yourself.
Yeah. And you don't have to do anything. Like I know that it's very comforting for us all to think that we are doing our lives, but we aren't. You know, they're doing us. And so you don't need to believe me about that or try and conceptually force that into your brain. But it's like the relationships, the jobs, the house, the city, whatever it is that needs to transform and fall away and shift, it will. Like it will when the time is right. It will do it itself. And it might look like you saying certain words to certain people. It might look like you going to a closing for a new house in a new city. It will look like those things in the outside world. But really, life is just scooping you up and it's putting you wherever it needs to put you. And I think one of the things that I have found helpful for myself is looking back, because we can all look in our own rearview mirrors and think about times when we really, really, really wanted something to go a certain way and it didn't. And even if the not getting the certain way didn't work out, it eventually led us somewhere better. Like I think about an example of when I was in college, I applied to go to the European Honors Program at RISD, which would have meant a year in Italy making art. Okay.
That sounds phenomenal.
I did not get accepted. And so instead of spending my senior year eating gelato and dating Italian men and traveling to museums and looking at frescoes, what happened was or maybe it was my junior year. It was my junior year. My body hit the end of the road. A road that started when I was born with a birth injury. And it was that year that my body was just done. I couldn't open my mouth. I could only squeeze a little straw between my teeth and sometimes very soft noodles. Couldn't turn my head to the right. There were lots of days I couldn't put weight on my right leg. I had severe chronic pain through my whole spine and head. I had very severe jaw disorder and blah, 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 other stuff. And so instead of spending that year eating gelato in Italy, I spent that year going to doctors 3 or 4 times a week. If you could pick one, you wouldn't pick the one I got. It sucks. But what happened was I healed ultimately over a period of years. I healed a body that had been broken since day one. I experienced for the first time in my life at age 23 being pain-free. I started to move in ways I had never been able to move before, like, oh, I feel like going for a run or whatever. It led me into a whole career about holistic health and the body and how the body is the way. Like, these are big wins. This is a big fucking deal, ultimately, long term. Short term, I wanted a year in Italy. So it's like we can all think about things in our past where life scooped us into something, some stream that we didn't want to go into. And ultimately, it was for our greater good. And so like, if that provides a little relief, like find the example in your life where you're like, that thing you really wanted didn't work out. And ultimately, you got something way better. Like if I could have memories of 1 year in Italy making art versus this whole career trajectory for now the whole second half of my life of a pain-free, thriving, beautifully mobile body and a career life dedicated to helping other people inhabit their own bodies and heal, which gives me endless joy, I would definitely pick that, in a zoom out.
That's the case with most people. It's like if you catch someone on the other end of the metamorphosis, right? Like when you're in that
it's like
flap,
phase, flap. I like it better here.
When it hurts so bad, it's like, get me out. Like I'll pay you. What do I need to do?
Right, when you're the just mushy goop in the cocoon. Ew.
Yeah, you want out. But most people, when you talk to them, and I would put myself in this category, they don't want to change their lives.
Right.
Like even the hard stuff, most people don't go back and say, if I had a magic power, I would just erase this, because we have some deep sense that these experiences that we've been through were transformative. I mean, I guess that's the best way to say it, that they've made us who we are, but not just in the identity way, because that's where it's tricky. Like they can make us like, I'm so tough, I don't take shit from anyone. Like that could be an identity that forms out of trauma. Mm-hmm. But it also lets you see your whole set of capacities, all of them, right? It's like an invitation. And most people wouldn't change that. They wouldn't eradicate it. It's like you were talking about at the end of the episode last week. We make suffering into being a big problem. Mm-hmm. But for most of us, these moments where we're shifting tides and our clothes don't fit and, we're going to have to confront our landscape changing, our ecosystem changing, it may feel painful while you're in it or super uncomfortable or super oogie or scary. But we can remember, like Brooke was saying, if we can get a bridge of a memory, we can remember that this has always been something that later we go, I'm glad I lived through that. Mm-hmm. I understand life differently. I understand myself differently. This is a really good reminder for me right now.
Yeah, me too. Because like everything that's going on right now, it's just such a helpful context. Like I can struggle against it and really dislike this feeling and then come up with all the thought, am I just going to become that person, that obnoxious spiritual person that just sits in silence or that says 3 words? I don't like that person. That's not true. It's just what my ego's kicking up fear about.
Or the one that has a very quiet mind. Just kidding.
You know how I do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I know. This is like, isn't this the upshot of all these like spiritual teachings and all is like, you can't fight reality really. It just doesn't work.
It just doesn't work.
So like all this energy that I'm using to be like, okay, like I could be like, I'm not going to be this sick person and I'm not going to identify as someone who needs rest. So I'm going to like go out and then what? Like my big party night is I go out and have a drink and then like I'm hungover for 2 days. Who won that match? Me or reality?
Right. Yeah.
Or like, I don't know, fill in the blanks. Like Mario didn't invite me to go to, I don't know, some pool party with a rave at it. And I was like, you don't know that I won't want to go to that, because he's like, you won't like that thing. I may want to go to something like that. You can't box me in. But let's face it, he doesn't listen to the show, so I can admit it. There's a good chance I'd be at a pool party rave going, oh my God, get me out.
Yeah, so loud, so many people. I'm so tired.
So loud. I am who I thought I was, not the person who can tolerate this, not this old identity that I'm really trying to cling to. So I guess, kind of just what you were saying was pointing me at this idea that it's well, there's not much we could do. We can't fight reality. We're meant to evolve and to change and to heal. We're meant to. We all want to go home. And if we put a little awareness on it, whichever way we're all doing that, we're going to go home. Yeah. And so we can fight it, and that's fine. And if that's what's up, that's what's up. But watch. And see how far that gets.
Fatiguing, right?
It's fatiguing, and eventually that will come to its end of the road. The wheel will fall off,
Byron Katie says, reality always wins. I love that one.
She says that.
Reality always
found
wins.
That for myself. Reality does always win.
100% of the time.
Maybe instead just get really good support.
Yes, that is the thing, guys, because I understand big, overwhelming, blah, blah, blah. Support. I have so much support, and I'm so grateful.
Some self-compassion, some soup, and a Netflix account.
Amen. Thank you so much for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any resources we mentioned, live at blissandgrit.com. You can also come play with us on the social media channel of your choice. Instagram and Facebook are where we are most readily available, and we do get back to people pretty quickly there. We're Bliss and Grit at both of those spots. We also have an email these days because we're very high tech and fancy that way, which is dear@blissandgrit.com. So if you have questions, particularly if you have things you'd like us to chat about on the show, send those over to us. We have gotten lots of delightful reviews. Thank you so much. It's very sweet. We love hearing from all of you. It helps other people find the show, lets us know that we're doing stuff that's actually mattering in people's lives, which is a big deal. So here is one review, and of course, iTunes review names are strange, so if I mispronounce this, but I think it's L. Zernamier from the United States. I feel a tinge of joy and comfort whenever I see a new episode of this podcast pop up in my Stitcher feed. Somehow, I can always find a correlation between the subjects that get brought up on the podcast and my own life. These girls are always providing much-needed perspective on things that are going on in my life, and I'm truly thankful that they're taking the time and effort to do this podcast. You guys are a special part of my day. Thank you so much. We're so glad that it's mattering out there in the real world. We'll be back next week.